Hello and welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. We're here on episode 116, and before I clicked the record button, Mike and I were discussing the problems of the world.
Yes, we were.
Our own lives, and thinking of devious solutions to make adult music become dominant in the music podcast world.
And we still have no ideas about how to do that, so here we are again.
Here we are just talking about the music again.
But please, we do get a lot of gratuitous advice about how to do it that we're obviously not going to follow. So.
If you're a new listener, I'm your co-host Russ, and over there is Mike.
This is Mike, yeah. Do I sound bitter tonight? I don't know. It was a rough week, that's all. I don't know. In classical music, I got some stuff I want to talk about here that's interesting, but I don't know. I'm not as excited this week as I was last week with the really fantastic piano albums that we heard. This week I thought, choral music, this will be fun. But it wasn't, and organ music too. But on the classical end, I mean, it was good, but it wasn't as great as last week. So anyway, we'll go through it. I'll let you know when we get to that.
I'll cheer you up with all the cool organ jazz I've got after that. So.
That was good. Yeah, there was some good organ jazz this week. I want to just mention, you had passed on the Larry Golding recording this week. And I listened to that this week as you sent it to me. I did like the oozing bass in it, but you made a good choice to put these three instead of that one. I mean, that one, like you said, it's been reviewed. He's a pretty well-known organist and keyboardist, so that'll get listened to anyway. But I got to say, I liked these more unknown ones a lot better. Yeah.
I think it's a nice little program, so I'm looking forward to getting to that when we get there. As part of our normal 6 recording program, every week we bring you 3 classical and 3 jazz releases, and then for those you can find links in the episode description. There's Spotify there, there's Apple Music there, everything we'll discuss right at the top. There's also a link to the full episode playlist. You can listen to all of it most of the time on Deezer when they don't forget the tracks.
Well, I know what we're going to do this week because we got another next week because we got another like Deezer recording that isn't like complete. I don't know what's going on here.
Anyway, that's our preferred CD quality streaming platform. And you can also listen to the podcast there. Get the podcast and all the recordings in the same place. Just look us up, username Adult Music Podcast. Now, if you don't see the full description or the links aren't active on whatever app or platform you listen to us on, you can always jump over to our host site, Podbean, podbean.com. Everything's easy to follow there for all the episodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please do follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us, and tell a music-loving friend. If you take a moment, give us a ranking or write a short review. That helps us get listed in the recommendations, and we can grow our audience that way. You can also come over and follow us on Facebook. Get some extra info. I put up a lot of releases this week. Lots of good jazz came out this month.
Yeah, and I put up like almost nothing in classical, although there are a few good classical stuff. There's some really interesting classical stuff coming up that I haven't heard yet, but I'm really curious about it. I'll see if I can put a few of those up, but we'll see, because I haven't really checked it out yet.
So check us out on Facebook. You can leave a message or comment there as well. And if you want to get in touch directly by email, any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We're also collaborating with a few other music-related podcasts we'd like to recommend. You can find links to them at the bottom of the episode description, and at the end of the episode audio, there will be little promos from each one. The first one is Tom Gauker's podcast, Something Came from Baltimore. It's a jazz, blues, and R&B interview podcast featuring interviews with well-known musicians and usually centered around a cool theme. There's also Famous Interviews and Neon Jazz by Joe Domino, who interviews artists, musicians, and writers. And then The Same Difference, 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. That's Johnny Valenzuela and Tony Habra, who look at several versions of the same jazz standard each episode, and they play snippets from each version, discuss the history of the original and the different versions. So please do check those out.
Yeah, and that last one, Same Difference, is a podcast that I, the classical guy, am very interested in because it's given me a lot of good information about jazz.
I don't have many standards this week, but I do have some things with historical significance to look into. I'm always interested to look back when things originally were performed and recorded. So
I love that Hammond organ sound, too. We got a lot of that in jazz this week.
No, it's full of it.
Yeah.
And, well, before we get into the music here, I think we're going to have to roll out the farewell theme again this week.
Yeah, I was all ready to go for this podcast, and then at the last minute, like before, like I got on, so I just got the news that we have a death and in the classical music world, and so here's a Here's our theme.
Let me get over to the piano.
And this week we lost Ingrid Haebler, the Austrian pianist, who was known as Madame Mozart due to her exquisite interpretations of Mozart's music. She died last week on 14 May, so while we were doing this recording last week on the piano recording, we did a piano episode too, which is kind of interesting. And she was 96 years old, so that's a good long life. I want to say something about this. It seems to me, in classical music anyway, pianists and conductors seem to live a very long time. And I have a theory about why this is. Now, if anybody's ever done Tai Chi, they say that Tai Chi, like the resting pose where you have your arms out, is supposed to allow your chi energy to flow, and that gives you longer life. And that's pretty much the position that conductors and pianists spend most of their working life in. So I'm wondering about that. Anyone wants to write a thesis about that?
Well,
or check into that, do it up. It's another one of my wacky theories.
Well, I think music in general keeps you young and keeps your brain active anyway. And
I think it depends on how you live. I mean, classical musicians tend to live pretty clean lives. I mean, the technique that's required, like, sort of, you have to kind of, it's almost like being an athlete. You have to kind of stay healthy or take care of your body, at least in the sense of, your brain,
right.
And hand coordination and things like that. And that requires some work.
I think I saw that Ron Carter is 86.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And this week, George Coleman just put out a new live recording on Cellar Live, and he's 88.
There are a lot of very aged jazz musicians too, which is nice to see because in the past,
used to not make it.
They used to not make it because they were all like on heroin or something.
Yeah.
They would just kind of die these early deaths, which was really sad. They were all legends. But now, a lot of them are living to be very old, which is nice to see.
Yeah, and staying active. That's great.
And staying active too. Well, I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
You stay active, you just live longer. I mean, once you feel like people don't need you anymore, you just don't, something happens to you and you just kind of shut down, and that's the end. I see that with there's a Catholic priest here in Kyoto where we live, Father McDonald, who's he's got to be closing in on 95 by now. And just after a mass, he once I don't know that he's doing mass anymore, but he was just surrounded by people like baptizing babies and stuff like this. I mean, they all need him. So, I think that just kind of keeps him going,
right.
That sort of thing. I was kind of observing that. So stay useful, people.
Right.
That's what we're doing with this podcast. We're staying, we intend to be doing this into our 90s. So we'll be talking a lot slower then, but that's okay. We'll still be listening. Hopefully my hearing will hold up. We'll see. Okay. So Ingrid Haebler, rest in peace, I should say. Okay. So let's see. So Haebler, let me say a little more about her. She was the quintessential Viennese musician, exuding warmth, clarity, and poise. This is an article I read about her. And she also had the wit and imagination to compose and perform her own delightful cadenzas. She was really famous for her Mozart playing, but she played everything from Bach to Bartók, so the modernists, and that was pretty much her repertoire. Now, we think, she didn't play anything past Bartók, but remember, she was 96. That was her era. Right. And that, modern pianists play music from today as well. So maybe we'll hear some of that in the future, too, because I've got another good piano recording coming up soon. All right. Are we getting into this?
We're going to start out with some new recording of very old music this week, I think.
A new recording of very old music. Okay, now I picked this one because it's an Italian composer. I just love Italian Baroque. There's something about it to me. It just feels like a new world coming into being, because before the Baroque, there was the Renaissance era, mostly masses, polyphonic music. And Baroque music was polyphonic as well. But the Baroque was invented in Italy. It pretty much started around the year 1600, and Monteverdi was the first great Baroque era composer. Now, I want to inform people, I'll give you a little bit of history. The word Baroque was, it means like a misshapen pearl. So it implies something ugly. It kind of means it's the word that Renaissance era composers would apply to this new kind of music. That music, it's so awful. It's ugly. It's Baroque. Okay. But they just kind of went with it. I guess jazz is the same way, because it was kind of, I think the word jazz, J-S-S,
right,
was like an insulting term, I guess, to describe this music. And then they just took it on And now it's a very cool word. It's got two Z's at the end. I think it's rather unique. I really like that. But anyway, the Baroque era, they kind of was the same sort of thing. It was something new and something kind of unwelcome to certain composers, but it took off and dominated European music for 150 years. And a little bit after that, too, until the death of Bach and the rise of classical era music with Haydn and Mozart. Anyway, this composer that we're talking about now is going to be Girolamo Frescobaldi. What a great name. Anyway, this is his Fiori Musicali, or organ masses, and these were published in 1635. Now, that's the early Baroque. Bach was born in 1685, so this is, 50 years before Bach was born. So this is still the days when the Italian Baroque was the new thing and it was dominating everything. This is played by Richard Lester on the organ, and that was something that drew me to this recording too. I've heard Richard Lester, some other recordings that he's on, and I really like his playing. He tends to play organs that maybe they're not really old. This one was built in 1983. Yeah, it's the organ at St. John's Church, Totnes, Devon, built by William Drake Limited in 1983. But it has a very old kind of sound to it, and that always attracts me. He's basically the only player on this, but it's also credited to the Greenwood Consort, directed by Mark Bennett. But all they really do is a few Gregorian chants to fill in the bits of the mass. And this is on the Somm Recordings label. Now, we did a recording of them earlier of, who's that guy? The Israeli guy, Borenstein, Nimrod Borenstein. And he was on the Somm label. And we really liked that recording. So I thought, And they actually gave us like a like or something like that on Facebook. They responded to us, so we were happy about that. And I said, we'll have to give another recording of them. And this Frescobaldi one was available. I thought I would do this. Okay, so Fiori Musicali. Was Frescobaldi's last work. Now, I mostly know him for his like keyboard or harpsichord music. So I don't know much of his organ music, and I thought this would be great. The organ mass, in which choir and organ alternate. Well, it's not really a choir, but this dates back to the early 15th century or the 1400s, 200 years before these masses were written. And after the year 1600, the credo, this is really interesting, the credo, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, that prayer, was forbidden to be sung in church and was notably recited aloud. There's a lot of really interesting church history that you can learn via music. So there you go. Anyway, one of the things that it kind of... we were talking about Deezer, and one of the things that annoyed me about this particular release on Deezer is they called this Fiori Musicali excerpts. And it's really not excerpts. I mean, these are all the organ music for the complete masses, but certain tracks were left out because of, for example, there are lots of settings of the Kyrie, and the organist gets to choose which one he's going to use on any particular day. But they're fairly complete as far as we're concerned.
Well, recently on Deezer, we get excerpts from lots of things.
I know. Yeah. We have this, I don't know, Deezer, and it's all classical too. The jazz is okay with them, but some classical releases, and this has been happening pretty consistently. Yeah. A lot of the classical releases are missing a track or an entire work.
Yeah, they still haven't fixed the Sudbin recording, even though I sent them 2 messages about it.
Yeah, I sent them a message too, and they said something. And now one of the recordings we're going to talk about last week has an issue. I haven't written to them about it yet, but we'll see. Anyway, they need me in their classical music department, basically, is what's going on there. Anyway, we're not hearing all of the compositions here of the Fiori Musicali. Frescobaldi provided multiple settings of the Kyrie for each mass, and Lester chooses 5 of those for each particular mass. So it's not excerpts, but it's just, let's say, incomplete. All right. There are 3 masses on this album, and they're organ masses. So we're not going to hear any real singing. We're going to hear chanting, unison lines. Unison means there's no harmony, or the harmony, more accurately, the harmony is all the same note. So sort of what you would hear in chants at, let's say, a football pitch or a baseball game or something like that. If somebody's going to sing some song to encourage their team. Anyway, tracks 1 through 9. Missa number 2, In Festis Duplicibus 1. I don't know how to say 1 in Latin. Cuncti potens genitor Deus. I really wish I knew Latin. What this means is in the double feasts, Festus Duplicibus 1, in the double feast 1, and Almighty God the Father. This is the Mass of the Apostles. I really don't know the festival date for this. But it's a number of, I don't want to say movements, but it's organ works for the Mass that are supposed to be played during the course of the Mass. And the first one is Toccata avanti la messa degli Apostoli. This is very powerful. The organ sound is full, and we're going to get a lot of different organ sounds on this recording, which I thought was really made it interesting for me anyway, to hear what this organ can do or some of the things. Thankfully, it's not overpowering, which wouldn't really be appropriate for this era. The recording is rich and captures the tone of the organ well. This toccata has voices moving within chords. That's pretty common with a lot of Frescobaldi's music and with church music in general. The bass is particularly satisfying as it's way low down in frequency, and I have a subwoofer, and that just makes it sound great. Anyway, the second track is Kyrie, and then there's a Kyrie plain chant, and then another Kyrie setting. So the organ is playing the vocal parts, basically, which are polyphonic. At 55 seconds, we hear the vocals sing the plain chant in unison and unaccompanied, as is the custom, sounding like monks in a cloister. One of the wonderful things about, if you ever go to a European church at the right time, you can actually hear, if there are monks there, they'll often be chanting at certain hours of the day. Like there'll be some kind of like room in the back where they're chanting the prayers. It's really wonderful. The organ then returns with the second Kyrie, more chord-based. And I love the warm sound of the organ in the second Kyrie. And I wish I knew the names of the stops being used. I'll try to describe them. This one's very breathy in its attack. And one of the things I really love about this particular organ is in the breathier tones. You can actually hear something in the pipes opening to allow the air out. It's kind of like a mechanical, like, ch sound. Right. And it's just, I think it adds a lot. I really like that sound a lot. Like the pipes are kind of making some kind of effort or something. Maybe Richard Lester will get in touch with us and let us know what that is. Track 3, Christe plain chant, Christe, and another Christe plain chant. Remember, the credo couldn't be sung. The Christe is okay. Anyway, vocals sing the plain chant. At the 16-second mark, the Christe setting is played by the organ, and it has an appealing light feel to it. The melody going up to the high register. Again, voices moving within solid-sounding chords, and we hear another plain chant at the end. Then there's another Kyrie, followed by a Kyrie plain chant, followed by a Kyrie in track 4. Here, the organ comes in loudly and powerfully with the Kyrie. This is more brassy and full-toned. The vocals sing the plain chant, then the organ comes in brightly and full-toned, also with some volume. This sounds celebratory in its brightness and movement. Now, the way Lester is interpreting this as far as the stops go, his mass has a lot of variety to it. There's a lot of things to draw the ear throughout the mass. Now, when you're listening to this, you should keep in mind you're not hearing these, track by track. There would be parts of the mass recited or whatever activities are done during the mass, and then you hear organ music accompanying some of them, and in some cases, like as sort of a pause between the elements of the mass. Track 5, Canzone dopo l'epistola. Unusual, as it begins with a slow chordal introduction. The stop used is focused and powerful and brassy. At the 31-second mark, the texture becomes agitated, moving away from the solid sustained chords that started the section. There's a dancing quality to the voices in this one. At 2 minutes and 3 seconds, a completely new texture is heard, beginning with a repeated note, and the rhythm is also upbeat and joyful. Track 6, Toccata avanti il ricercar. This is subdued, so a little contrast. Drones in the bass and conjunct movement in the upper voices. Conjunct means that they're moving sort of step by step. There are no real leaps in the melody or harmony. And it's kind of comforting to hear music like that. The organ stop is breathy, perhaps named after a wind instrument, with a gauze feel over the tone. The 7th track, Altro ricercar, another ricercare. Ricercare is like a very common set of variations, I guess you can call them. It's actually a study on a certain theme. I don't know if I'd call it variations, but the meaning is what a ricercar would sound like really differed with a lot of different composers, so it's really hard to pinpoint. Anyway, this particular one, track 7, sings out brightly in its opening high notes. This is a long section, 5 minutes and 49 seconds. Most of the tracks on this album are 3 minutes or less. And it continues with moving voices with long-held chords. Ricercar is exploring a motif, as this one does, and it gives a sense of solidity to this theme. Track 8, Toccata per l'elevazione, the L'elevazione is the elevation of the host during the Mass. Christians will know what I mean. This is reflective in mood. It usually is. And there's a toccata that follows this called Ricercar con obbligo del basso come appare, which isn't on the CD or streaming for some reason. I mean, they could have put it on streaming, but they didn't. But you can apparently hear it at Somm's website. I didn't actually check that it was there. Anyway, just so you know, if you're sort of an academic and really need to hear like everything that was recorded for this album. There's a breathy attack on this track, a sound I really love on the organ. I could listen to an entire album of this particular organ stop. I really love it. And this one sounds particularly good. You can hear sudden breaths of air on the pipes as the note is pressed down, which I also love. It gives the organ an antique sound. You know, those new, big, powerful American organs are kind of, they don't really, I don't know if they do this sound. This sound mimics the very old organs that you can sometimes hear in Italy. Anyway, track 9, Canzon quarti toni dopo il post comune. This is after communion. A dancing full-toned brassy sound with quite a bit of gleam on it. It's mostly played in the upper register with middle registers providing the anchoring bass tones. Some subtle low bass peaks in at times. At 57 seconds, the stop is changed and we get a breathier tone with the playing in the middle register. It ends brightly back in the higher range. So one of the things I'm noticing about this recording so far is between tracks, there's a lot of variety of tone or timbre, let's say, in the organ, and that makes it really interesting for me. So I really enjoyed that particular Mass, and really this entire album. There's a lot of invention in the music and also in Lester's approach to it. Tracks 10 through 17, Missa number 1, In Dominicis infra annum orbis factor. This is for an ordinary Sunday Mass. It just means for Sundays in the year. Toccata avanti la Messa della Domenica. So Messa della Domenica would just be an ordinary Sunday Mass. This one's in Dorian mode, and it's I love modal harmony. It's a brief toccata with voices moving within chords, some rich bass pedals on the bottom end. The Kyrie planchet Kyrie has a breathy, gentle attack. It's very solemn. It's an appealing setting. It's got a droning note in the mid-range as the bass moves, which is a little unusual. The Kyrie planchet is heard, then the second Kyrie, more melodic than the first, played with different stops pulled, but still gentle and solemn. Track 3, Christe planchet, Christe, and Christe planchet. The planchet is heard first. The organ setting features sustained notes in the mid-range as the lower and higher voices play melodies. It's a solemn sound played rather softly. By the end, there's a pedal bass anchoring the harmony. The Christe planchet is heard again, this time with a different melody. And the fourth section, that should be track 13, Kyrie, Kyrie planchet, and Kyrie. We have another Kyrie. A high drone accompanies moving bass and mid-range voices playing melodies. I do like the way Frescobaldi just puts the drone. Usually it goes in the pedal and the bass end, but he'll just put it anywhere in these pieces, and I found this really interesting. We hear the Kyrie planchet, then another setting of the Kyrie in full organ voice. The attack is solid, tone is bright. The fifth section, Canzon dopo l'epistola, track 14, has a dancing rhythm. The melodies are pretty lively. They're played polyphonically as in a fugue. There's a cadence at around the 50-second mark, then an extreme register change as we move to the twinkling high range of the organ. That whole kind of almost electronic sound that the high end of the organ makes you think of twinkling stars for some reason. It just feels like really high up in the heavens to me. And I think the composers who wrote for this instrument probably thought so too. Even the bass is in the upper range for most of this section. The section at the minute and 57-second mark is in a different sound entirely, the sound we generally associate with the organ. It's bright and smooth, played in the full range of the instrument. Section 6, Ricercar dopo il credo, is a ricercare again. This is a form. The CD booklet, by the way, claims that this section is only available on the Somm website, but it seems to be on the CD. I think that's probably a misprint in the booklet. Anyway, this starts with a steady pace to the rhythm. It sounds more measured than anything we've heard previously, with the melody gleaming out in the upper voices over a steady bass. Just after 2 minutes, a new section with a fuller, more powerful sounding organ tone begins. The seventh section, Toccata cromatica per l'elevazione. That's a word I love to hear. Chromatica means chromatic, which means all 12 tones. This is not like Schoenberg 12 tones where there's an order to them, but it means that there's no real key, that you're just hearing all. Well, there is a key, but they'll use all of the notes between like to an octave. Anyway, this is a poignant sounding section. There's a wavering tone to the breathy attack. The whole sound of the organ on this track catches the ear. It's played quietly and with the poignancy Lester described it with in his notes. I love this type of intimate, breathy organ sound, and this particular piece soothed and calmed me. Sample this if you're interested in the organ. If you're interested in this album, I would sample this track. It's track 16, Toccata Chromatica per l'elevazione. And by the way, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, listen to Bach's Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue, and you'll see why I love chromatic music so much. It's really interesting. Anyway, the last section of this particular mass, Canzon post il comune, so this is the song after communion. We have a breathy, fluty tone here and a cheerful dancing melody, which is uplifting. The sound changes to a brighter, brassy tone at around the minute and 20-second mark, and the music becomes less rhythmic and more melodic. A more dancing rhythm starts in the same tone at the 3-minute mark as the piece cheers up again and ends on a positive feeling chord. And we need that positivity these days, don't we?
For sure.
Yes. Solidity, positivity, tonic notes. I love it. The 20th century did away with a lot of this. So I think this is part of the reason why we like this old music so much, because there is a sense of arrival and solidity to it. And that makes us, it just gives us a sense, a feeling that we have a center, I think, or that there's something holding down things. Anyway, tracks 18 through 27 is the third mass, Missa number 3, In Festus Beate Maria Virginis cum Jubilo. This is for the Feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I don't know the feast day, though. Anyway, the first track is Toccata Avanti la Messa della Madonna, the toccata before the Mass. This is a majestic sound. The brief toccata has an appealing, rising figure leading into droning chords with cascading figures in the middle. Second section, Kyrie, Kyrie plain chant, and Kyrie. The first Kyrie is rather slow and methodical in its unwinding. The attack is a bit cushioned, but the timbre is bright. There's a plain chant, and then the second Kyrie has an even softer attack, and is played in the lower end of the keyboard. I do like the way Richard Lester, as the organist, keeps us guessing as to what sound he's going to use in the next section. I really rather he was always kind of trying to guess and sort of anticipating that, and it made this album really interesting to listen to. The second Kyrie is contemplative and rather slow and much less bright than the opening Kyrie. Section 3, this is going to be track 20. Christe plain chant, Christe, Christe plain chant. Starts with the plain chant. The organ Christe, has the light, heavenly, spacious sound that arpeggiated figures in the high end of the keyboard produce. It's a very churchy sound. The Christe plain chant is heard again in a new melody. Yeah, if you ever go to Italy, and for example, you can go to the Basilica, the Duomo in Florence, or really almost any city, and you see the statues of these saints or holy figures, and above them there'll be the starry vault. The starry vault is like a symbol of heaven, that's where they are. They're like in this other plane. So I feel like this sound on the organ is the equivalent of that sort of image in the arts. So if you happen to be in Europe listening to this, check that out and think about it. It's I don't know, I feel like it just kind of lifts me up a bit just to even contemplate this sort of thing. Anyway, track 21, this is section 4, Kyrie, Kyrie plain chant, Kyrie. This has full-sounding chords, the first Kyrie, played mezzo forte, and they characterize the opening Kyrie. We hear the Kyrie plain chant in a melody reaching to a higher, soaring range of the voices. Full tone after the chant is played forte with a brassy, bright sound. Fifth section, track 22, Canzon dopo l'epistola, based on a flamenco dance tune from the Low Countries, which we think of as the Netherlands. There's a missing ricercare dopo il credo that's only available on Somm's website here. This is a dancing song that opens in the very high range of the organ with a bouncing repeated note followed by a dancing melody. There's counterpoint in the lower voices. It lifts the heart with its charming themes. At 1:40, a lower, more deliberately paced version of the song begins, again with contrapuntal lines. 6th section, track 23. Am I counting these tracks right? I hope so. Toccata Avanti, Il Ricercar, starts on a low bass keyboard note, which is possibly a high pedal. It sounds like it's in the keyboard range, though. But the melody line starts at its highest point and works its way down the keyboard, settling into a high melody afterwards, and has a soft attack. Next track, 23. This is section 7, Ricercar, con obbligo di cantare la quinta parte senza toccarla. Got that? Okay, let me explain. Lester remarks it's unclear what text is supposed to be sung here. So what this obbligo di cantare is to sing. There's a required singing part is what this means. Richard Lester remarks in his notes that it's unclear what text is supposed to be sung here. But Lester suggests the words Ave Maria seem appropriate, and that's what he has the choir sing in unison again. There's no harmony. This starts with a breathy tone in the high voices of the organ. There's a sung text used, Ave Maria in Latin, Ave Maria pleni di gratia, and the rest. Sung in unison harmony as a chant. The performance is soothing and reassuring for its chant-like repeated melody on the sung text. 8th section, Toccata per l'elevazione. This is track 25. Appropriately rising line at the beginning, since we are elevating the host and the organ melody is moving upward too. There's a wavering tone on the organ, like it might be blown out by a strong wind, as if it were a candle. I really enjoyed this tone. This is the first time we're hearing this on this album. It's kind of wavering. It's almost ghostly sounding. The harmony feels solid. The tempo is fairly slow, but the piece comes across with a quiet awe to it. Section 9, this is a very long mass. It's about a half an hour long. La Bergamasca. I like the high, soft attack tone of the opening of this piece, which comes across with a music box-like mechanical quality. It's different in feeling to everything we've heard up to now. There's a light, almost Renaissance-like dancing melody to it. The variation comes in, the middle voices, with contrapuntal lines. All variations in the 5:45 track change textures, and the organ can produce a lot of them. The textures contrast to such an extent that it's easy to follow each new variation on the theme. It's very appealing. At 3:20, we even get the ghostly, wavering tone again, followed by a completely contrasting, almost fairground-like full sound. That's track 26, and I'm going to recommend that you sample this track as well. It'll give you an idea of what you're going to hear on this album, because I think Lester goes through all of the sounds that he uses on this album in this one track. Anyway, the last track on the album, Capriccio sopra la Girometta. A Girometta is a 15th century song. This starts lightly on the appealing high end of the organ. Each voice in the harmony gradually enters at a lower pitch. The opening is kept light and breathy and played piano, which means soft. This proceeds as a set of variations too, each given a heavenly contrasting texture by the organ stops, making the structure easy to follow. And that's the end of the CD. There are actually extra tracks apparently on the Somm website, which I did not check out. Anyway, the album itself is very comforting in a way only Baroque era music for church organ can achieve. It's kind of a unique sort of calm. The solid harmonies of the works anchor the soul, and the sound of the instrument has an antique quality to it, and I enjoyed listening to it. Richard Lester's always appealing way with this particular organ was appealing as well. He really keeps us guessing which texture he's going to use for the next section of music, and that kept me interested. Lester projects this music in a contemplative way, like he's channeling the masses of the time. It's a pretty somber album of contemplative music that serves its function perfectly. And Lester himself, in the booklet notes, he's not, I wouldn't call him academic, but he does seem to, he's trying to kind of communicate academic ideas to, say, a lay audience, so it's got that sort of tone to it. But this really isn't an academic album. It can easily be enjoyed if you're looking for something a little contemplative to listen to in the background. And it's good to just actually focus on as well. I enjoyed it anyway. It's a fantastic organ sound. Lester is an inventive player, at least with the stops. And I would recommend this to people who would be interested in such a thing.
Yeah, my description has a lot of the same adjectives that you just mentioned. Certainly the male voices have a small supportive kind of chanting role here. And the organ is overall on the dark side and kind of brooding, but it does have a wide variety of tones throughout the program. The music itself is contemplative, serious, sometimes to the point of being somber. That's what I had written. But that's not a bad thing for a mass or certain religious music. And think of the year 1635. It's interesting to think that this is almost 400-year-old music that influenced Bach. And what I always enjoy most about listening to music of this period is the harmonic direction and where the chords go and the moving lines and how they resolve. It does surprise me in a way that I don't get surprised by in the later Baroque era. So I always enjoy that. And I found it kind of calming and an interesting listen.
I want to say something also to people who listen to classical music. We think about Bach as the giant of the Baroque era. And, he's so much better than, like people like Frescobaldi, for example. But you got to remember, this has to do with Newton's quote about standing on the shoulders of giants. Bach himself was a great giant, but he was highly influenced by all of the music of his time. He was a real polymath, just walking miles to hear, like, Buxtehude play the organ. He was very familiar with Vivaldi's concertos at the time, and Frescobaldi's music as well. So you want to keep that in mind. Bach became who he was because of the people who came before him, despite the fact that he surpassed them all. But if you were born 100 years earlier, who knows? He might have been one of them. We don't really know. Keep that in mind, though, because the music of the past really does influence the music of the present.
Always.
Yeah. Anyway, this next album, Giuseppe Verdi, a composer close to my heart. Drama, opera. What was that? Okay. Anyway. I'm not going to say anything about this. Okay. Verdi choruses. This is performed by the Coro e Orchestra del Teatro alla Scala, where many of Verdi's operas were premiered. Conducted by Riccardo Chailly, one of the great opera conductors of our time. And this is on the Decca label. So, of course, you're thinking, this is going to be the best recording of these works of the 21st century so far. Yeah, maybe they are, because I don't know of any others that have been recorded in the 21st century. But I was rather disappointed by this album, and I'll explain why as we go through. Anyway, one thing about Verdi is he was very concerned with character in his operas and wanted every aria and every chorus to match its character and situation perfectly. These choruses demonstrate that well, but the problem is they're taken out of their context in the opera, and here they kind of sound rather samey, let's say. There are character differences, but having them one after the other, I don't know that this works well. Although if you really love them, you're going to want to be able to isolate them like this anyway. Anyway, in the booklet, Paolo Gallarati wrote the evocative booklet notes for the CD. I'm going to refer to them for my summaries in the context of these choruses, and I think that's the best part of this recording, where it is some summaries, although the English translator leaves a little bit to be desired, and I'll explain why in a minute. Okay, the first track is from the opera Nabucco. Now, Nabucco is King Nebuchadnezzar. You would never guess that, right? But Nabucco sounds a lot better, I think, than Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, this is from Act 1. Gli arredi festivi giù cadono infranti, which means throw down and destroy all festive decorations. This is kind of a depressed sort of chorus. In this part of the opera, Nabucco, here the Levites are sitting in Solomon's temple and invite the virgins to prayer with a solemn religious chorale. The women then pray sweetly above flowing harp notes. Anyway, this album has clear sound from the bass all the way up into the high range, so you can hear everything that's happening. The brass sounds very clear too. Everything does. The recording, however, is very top-heavy. The bass doesn't really explode out of the speakers in loud sections, and I feel like that kind of holds back some of the power that these choruses can have. The recording doesn't sound as luxurious and rich as it can. There's a lot of fantastic brass in this that would really appeal to us. It's a clear recording. It's recorded for detail, and the chorus and the orchestra, and especially the chorus, are placed pretty far away, I think, from the microphones. I understand why. The voices, you don't want to overpower the orchestra during the fortissimi, and there are many on this album. The characterization from Chailly and La Scala is first rate in this particular piece. The transition from the explosive opening to the priest chorus to the Virgin's prayers are well wrought. That's not going to be the case throughout, though. This album starts well, although I'm already kind of not so happy about the way the recorded sound is coming across. It sounds a bit distant to me, and the bass doesn't really register as strongly as I'd like. Anyway, the second track, this is great. Nabucco, Act 3, Va pensiero sul ali dorate. This is an aria that every Italian knows, mostly because a lot of Italians want this to be Italy's national anthem, and it's not. And I think if this were Italy's national anthem, they would win every sporting event they ever played. And maybe would have done better in World Wars I and II. Anyway, this is the Chorus of the Hebrew Slaves, and it's very inspiring. It sort of gives the Italian mind the idea of the Risorgimento, which is the unification of Italy, that revolutionary time when Italy finally became a united nation after just millennia of just being separate states. And this was kind of something that was in the air at the time, and captures the feeling of that revolutionary fervor perfectly. It's a song that evokes homesickness and flying, and Chailly and the La Scala Orchestra and Chorus were really born to perform this work. I like the brass sound before the choir begins. It's done with great gentleness and perfect shaping of the lines, so the melody indeed seems to float, like the thoughts sung about on the air of the orchestra's rhythm. This is about as characterful as you can get with this very famous piece. It's like hearing the Vienna Philharmonic do a waltz. It's in this orchestra and chorus's DNA. All right, so track 2, if you want really the best possible sound and performance on this album, because it's not all like this. Let's go on. Track 3, I Lombardi alla prima crociata. Crociata is the Crusades. Okay, so this is the Lombards at the First Crusade. There's an opera about this. Act 3, Jerusalem. This is a heartfelt song that rises from the procession of crusaders, women, and pilgrims crossing the valley of Josaphat, thinking about Christ's crucifixion and hoping that fate will allow them to die in these holy places. Yeah, these people were very different than we are. They wanted to die in Jerusalem. We just want to go there and kind of see where it all happened. Anyway, powerful brass opening in this, but it's a bit distant, so it doesn't really make as huge an impact as it can, but it does impact. There's light singing by the women's chorus in the following verse. They're placed a bit distantly so that the light accompaniment isn't overwhelmed. I keep going back to the balance. It's commendable, but during Fortissimi from the choir, the more forwardly placed orchestra isn't overwhelmed, but it sounds kind of odd. I'd like more presence on the voices. Excellently focused as they are, though. You can really hear all the individual notes and the harmony in the recording, so it is clear that way. I should mention Chailly has a reputation for fast tempos. I have his Brahms and Beethoven symphonies albums, and he conducts them all pretty fast. But in this case, that's not happening. The lines are all, in this case, perfectly paced so that the words and drama come across. But I think sometimes, anyway, let's move on. I'll get to that when I get to that. Same opera, Act 4, O Signore del tetto natio, O Lord from our native hearths. This embodies a similar homesickness to Va pensiero, so it's kind of a similar sort of sentiment. The chattering flutes vaguely recall a distant Arcadia, which I guess would be a perfect sort of place. Beautifully paced, but there hasn't been much variety so far in this album. It's enjoyable, nevertheless, for those familiar with the operas, but as a program in itself, I'm hoping we'll get some contrast to break up the pattern of longing choruses. This work is excellently paced and sung. Next we get to the opera Ernani, and this is the prelude, so there's no voices here. This points towards the intimacy of individual tragedy, and we hear the lead character's leitmotif in this. This is an instrumental break from the voices. It's stirring, and we can focus on the orchestra, which sounds absolutely plush. The bass is a bit richer here, but still doesn't impact. It's a good balanced sound that doesn't overpower, and Chailly does the Verdian rhythmic lilt especially well. Ernani, Act 3, Si ridesti il leon di Castiglia. The Lion of Castile rises again. And here, the march rhythm offers a universal cry of rebellion against the oppressor, an incitement to battle, release from slavery, victory or death, and the longed-for triumph or freedom. This chorus became a symbol of patriotic revenge in Risorgimento, Italy. One of the reasons like Verdi was so popular in Italy, because he was sort of a revolutionary figure. This has a stirring opening with repeated chords providing rhythmic motion. The chorus is a bit bolder than the preceding, and it's very brief. Track 7, Don Carlo, an opera that I really love. It's really powerful. Act 3, Spuntato ecco il di desultanza. All right. What this title means is, this is my translation, is the day of joy has suddenly appeared. Spuntare means like when something just pops up or appears, or by surprise or something like that. You can say like there's a famous lyric in Rossini's opera Barbiere di Siviglia, spunta la bella aurora. So the sun spunta in the sky. It just suddenly appears in the sky in the morning. The booklet notes translated as, "This happy day is filled with joy," which it's kind of close, but the happy day is filled with joy. I think it's a bit redundant because, of course, a happy day would be filled with joy. Anyway, it's an odd translation. There are going to be a few more of these. Anyway, this comes from the scene in the opera of the coronation of Philip II in front of the Cathedral of Valladolid, where an auto da fe ritual is taking place for the heretics identified during the Inquisition, sentenced to be burned at the stake. Verdi's music evokes the oppressive nature of Philip, his court and policies, while the king himself struggles under the oppressive weight of power. The people sing the praises of the greatest among kings to fanfares and bells before the atmosphere changes to a leaden funeral march sung by a chorus of monks. That part is very cool, by the way. Accompanying those convicted by the Inquisition to their deaths. Verdi presents the repugnant image of this abject, repressive barbarity using gloomy orchestral timbres with an ominous throbbing from the double basses, supported by bassoons, trombones, bass tuba, which has a great sound in this, and timpani and rolls of bass drum that seem to come from the bowels of the earth. Yeah, if the recording was a little more forward, but it does sound pretty cool, though. The opening is filled with cymbal splashes and fanfares from the brass. It's joyous and contrasts well with the darker trudge of the march, sung by bass voices with some excellent low brass playing for boding tones. Chailly and the choir put across some tangible darkness here. When the voice of the people come back in at the 4-minute mark, there's a distant brass fanfare, which the closer orchestra echoes. Much of the material here is kept in the distance, I guess in this case indicating some activity occurring far away. There's a bold ending with a bass drum rumble under the brass that's felt but not clearly heard. The next 3 tracks come from the opera Macbeth, based on, of course, the Shakespeare play. Act 1, Che faceste dite su, is sung by the witches at the beginning of Macbeth. Both choruses from Macbeth are sung by the witches here. These have fragmented, mocking, unpredictable qualities that depict the characters of the bearded women, who Verdi stated must be vulgar, yet bizarre and original. So this starts with rushing rhythms indicating unease. We've heard this sort of thing in like earlier romantic German opera. And the bass drum registers well here, but is not powerfully felt. When I say German opera, I'm thinking of Weber's Der Freischütz, when he's in the Wolf's Glen with the devil there. He uses similar figures. This has all women's voices sung together in harmony. Verdi's choruses tend to fall in certain recognizable patterns, and that happens in the second half of this particular chorus. It's dramatically effective in the opera, though, and it's well done here. Track 9, S'allontanarono. We get more of the eerie strings sounds from the previous era. Rushing string figures accompany the chorus, and at the end, a quick dotted 8th rhythm is used in the vocal line, giving the forward thrust. Okay, we go ahead to Macbeth Act 4, Patria Oppressa, which means my oppressed country. This is set in a deserted location, and the Scottish refugees lament the fate of their homeland, which the tyrant has reduced to a mass grave, and their complaints rise up to the heavens, which amplify them in a cosmic cry of grief. A series of orchestral figures and vocal exclamations above a texture of mournful calls is paired with the concept of the funeral bell, evoked metaphorically in dismal peals throughout the orchestra. Can I say something about this? This whole idea of my oppressed country, of other people taking it over. This was like normal life for most of history. We tend to take it for granted that we're all safe and secure now, but not necessarily the case. We should really listen to these operas and kind of remember what these people were experiencing. Not just the characters, but the people in the audience as well in some cases. Anyway, we've been hearing a lot of brass on this recording. Here it's ominous, and the bass drum provides a sinister feel. String pizzi have good presence, as do the weeping string figures that follow at 1 minute and 30 seconds. The chorus enters in a hushed tone, singing Oppressed Land of Ours. The words are Patria Oppressa. The hush of the chorus and orchestra is again distant, well caught, and especially well evoked. The entire chorus maintains that hush, with a few well-timed, dramatic forte moments. Track 11, and here's where the whole album, for me, starts to go wrong. I mean, it's already just okay, but we get Il Trovatore, Act 2, Verdi, Le Fosche Notturne Spoglie. This is more famously known as the Anvil Chorus, and it's something we've all heard if we've watched Bugs Bunny cartoons when we were kids, because it was used on that. The title means, look, night's dark cloak is removed. And again, this has a bizarre English translation in the track listing. It's probably the most famous chorus on this album, maybe with the exception of Va Pensiero, but for Italians. But for the rest of the world, it's probably this one. The opening comes across with presence. The Anvil chorus is first heard in the first minute, and it's done with power and a heavy rhythm. But I have to say, sparks don't really fly here. The strings are well caught. I feel like the orchestra overpowers the chorus, unbelievably, because the chorus is singing really loudly. Those hammers will be heard no matter how loudly the chorus sings, so I don't think this should have been thought about too much. The work might come across more effectively if the tempo were a bit faster. It sounds like too much care is being taken with the tempo here, or perhaps the orchestra and the chorus have sung this so many times, probably, that they're just not interested anymore. I'm not really getting any energy from this. Okay, it sounds good, though. The clarity is all fantastic. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't feel it's a very inspired performance. Anyway, track 12, La Forza del Destino, Act 3, Nella Guerra e la Follia. Oh, truer words have never spoken. War is folly. Anyway, this is a tarantella, and the music is instilled with a distinctive hint of local color, and it's rowdy, witty, stylized working-class cheer. In this scene, at daybreak in a military encampment near Velletri, the vivandiere, and vivandiere are people who follow an army and sell provisions to the soldiers. Okay, that happens anymore, but in the 19th century and before, it did. In English, the English word for a vivandiere would be a sutler, S-U-T-L-E-R. I wonder if I pronounced that right. Here, the vivandieri take the new recruits by the arm and lead them in a bouncy, spirited dance, praising the war and the other similar opportunities for carefreeness that it offers. Yeah, we don't really think of war like this anymore, but at the time, you weren't limited by social rules. I mean, we don't really live under too many social rules these days, but, war, despite the bloodshed, it was a time for, I guess, doing what you wanted. It was a release. Anyway, Chailly captures the happiness of this chorus well in his pacing. The tempo might be a bit slow, but it's helpful in keeping the choral voices together. It's pretty short. Okay, the most majestic chorus on the entire album is coming up from the opera Aida, Act 2, Gloria al Egitto al Iside. Iside is Isis. If you know this opera, Act 2 is entirely almost sung by the chorus. It's like a big sort of victory hymn. It's monumental and matches the monumental staging of this opera. This is really grand opera at its grandest. Anyway, it starts with distant brass fanfares. The strings pick up on it and are recorded up front. This, of course, comes on fortissimo when the chorus enters, and harmonic detail in the voices are well caught despite the power of the volume. The clarity is especially welcome when the quieter women's voices come in at about the 2-minute mark. Contrast here is given between voice registers, the men's voices that follow singing a lower range until the tenors come in. Track 14 continues after that. It's an instrumental, the Triumphal March and Ballet. It's a well-known melody led by the brass, I wish the brass were more up front here. I like the playing, but the distance of the recording takes away from the impact. The interpretation is standard, orchestral detail, and the march rhythm taking precedence in the interpretation. Rushing lines come next. There's actually a long vocal-less break in this track. It's 6 minutes and 10 seconds long. Chailly seems to have structured the various tempi to have maximum contrast to the section preceding the current tempo, so each section changes tempo in a pretty dramatic way. Balances are really weird on this particular track, though everything is commendably audible. At the 3 minute and 20 second mark, I like the snarling trombone, or it could be a euphonium. I'm pretty sure it's a trombone, though. At 3 minutes and 53 seconds, the rhythm seems to be too measured, too metronomic. I'd like to hear more of a rushing sound here. At this speed, though, the foreign elements like the distant perfumed cymbals draw the ear. Track 15, Aida Act 2, Vieni o guerriero vindice. The chorus is back, sounds a bit distant with some fortissimo accents from the orchestra. At the 35-second mark, they just sound too far away. The orchestra actually is upstaging them at this point. And the last track on the album from Simon Boccanegra. This is the prologue called Viva Simon. This contrasts with Aida, according to the notes. The expression of the Genoese people who burst chaotically onto the stage celebrating Simon Boccanegra's election as Doge is impulsive, spontaneous, and highly effective in its portrayal of the jubilation of a political side, as opposed to Aida's liturgical solemnity and the order of official ceremony. It starts with a good pace to it. The chorus registers well on top of the orchestra. They mostly sing fortissimo, and there are some cool bell effects in this one. It's very brief and has an odd ending. Well, the ending isn't odd, but it's an odd ending to the album due to its brevity. It really doesn't feel like it's finished. So anyway, to be honest, I thought I was going to enjoy this album a lot more than I did. It starts well, especially with the rousing rendition of Va Pensiero, with its rhythm like a wing caught by the air, well characterized. But I was a little disappointed by the distance of the ensemble and especially the voices from the microphones and the lightness at the bass end. The recording is very soft, and I had to boost the volume considerably just to have the sound impact, and it still didn't impact much. I guess I could have turned it up more, but I didn't want to blow the neighbors away. The bass registers but doesn't impact. I'm sure this was an artistic decision by the producers and engineers, but I would have liked a fuller sounding recording. Chailly takes tempos on the slower side as the album goes on. There's always clarity throughout the recording, miraculous considering the thickness of the orchestra and choral textures, but the famous anvil chorus from Il Trovatore has been better served elsewhere. It sounds too measured here, not spontaneous. A few of these works actually sound like the orchestra and the conductor are going through the motions of music that they know well and have performed many times. Now, as far as if you're interested in these works, I would look back into the 20th century and go for some of the recordings from the 1980s and 1990s of these. I thought this was just okay, really.
I didn't give this a real critical listen. I was just sort of going along with the music, and I was listening on my smaller system, so I didn't really notice the thinness to the recording. I thought the performances were mostly exuberant. I got pulled in, and just in the nature of the music, it's hard to not really.
Yeah, it is very big.
I guess if you're singing it, you really get inspired to sing it out. But in the program, there's also those gentle little lilting contrasts that are nice too, and give
those were good. I really liked the characterization of those. Yeah,
and then we have some good of those Italian explosions of brass and percussion. It's really hard for me to listen to opera kind of isolated. I really want to see the story too.
But no, that Verdi is all about drama. He's not as much about the musical content as say Wagner is, for example. But he's really focusing more on the dramatic impact of his story.
But I know most of the music here, but I'm not a big isolated opera listener, so it's hard for me to be more critical of the performances in isolation. But there's some highlights in here as well and good points. But maybe, as you say, the nature of this program makes it a little bit sort of modular as you go through it like that. Yeah. So
I think as an Italian American listener, I wanted blood from these choruses, and I didn't really get it on this recording. Some of the opera recordings, of the full opera recordings, these really puts that across really well. Yeah. All right, my third and final classical album is a contemporary composer that I really like, Tüür. Canticum, Canticorum, Caritatis, which is the name of one of the choral works on this album. This is an album of choral works by this Estonian composer. Now, when you think Estonia, you might think Arvo Pärt, and you'd be correct. They're both Estonian, but Tüür sounds absolutely nothing like Arvo Pärt. He's a lot more adventurous as far as, although Pärt is adventurous in his own way, but it's a very kind of quiet, almost holy sounding music from Pärt. Tüür's is more, he's inspired a lot by rock music, but that's not the case on this album, which I'll kind of talk about more. This is performed by the Collegium Musicali chamber choir, conducted by Endrik Üksvärav, who's Estonian and studied trumpet and French horn, as well as, I guess, conducting. This is on the Alpha label. Okay, so Tüür, who we've heard some of his orchestral music before, I find him to be a very exciting composer in general. He's around our age, in meaning he's middle-aged. He's in his 50s, possibly 60s. I'm not really sure. Anyway, he claimed that his music is teleological, and this is like a really good word for a good classical piece. Teleological means that something has an end, and this comes from Aristotle. For example, the end of an acorn is a tree. The acorn is made to become a tree. So an orchestral work has something that it inevitably has to become at the end or reach. So right from the beginning, you should be sort of aware, in a sense, where the work is headed, is what that means. The end is inevitable due to the music's DNA interacting with its environment, which is represented by the composer's imagination. That would be the environment. Tüür's music is often intensely expressive. I know how that translates into his orchestral music, but I was curious about what his choral music would sound like, so I programmed it here. Tüür also requires that the words are always audible in his music, so he would have been a good church composer back in the Renaissance era, because they were demanding that after all the polyphony that was happening. Even when there are richly decorated melismatic voices, he thinks the words have to be understandable. And he structures the work according to the words. Now, all the words are indeed understandable on this album, but they're all in Latin. So if you don't know Latin, although they're not all in Latin. Actually, this first piece is Trigloson Trishagion, which means 3 languages 3 times holy. And this was written in 2008. And this is related to the Orthodox Christian tradition. And it's sung in, there's a verse, and it's sung in Estonian, and then it's sung in Russian, and then finally in Greek. Now, this has to do with the Orthodox Christian tradition, which was originally Greek, and there's the Russian Orthodox Christianity with the icons, and Estonian too, which would be Tüür's nationality. Tüür uses various style references with the various languages, and you got to remember the work is structured according to the words. This will really become obvious if you listen to the album. There are 3 prayers in the text said in 3 different languages. So we hear the same prayer 3 times in a different language. It starts in Estonian. The writing is fairly traditional with harmonized vocal lines. The harmony is pretty comfortable to the ear, being fairly traditional. The occasional dissonance just adds spice to the texture and makes me want to go to an Orthodox Christian mass if they're going to play music like this. All voices sing the individual syllables at the same time, so the text is easy to follow. I like the way Tüür changes the vocals from women to men, and then to mixed choir as the languages change. When the women are singing, we hear Estonian, the men sing the Russian, and the mixed choir sings Greek. The Russian line has a particularly appealing phrase ending, dipping deep into the bass. At 3 minutes and 33 seconds, the glory beat to the father verse begins, and this pattern changes with the third verse, which is mixed choir throughout in all the languages. So we get a bit of variety in the voices as well. Tracks 2 through 6 are a mass, the Missa Brevis from 2013. Brief mass, so it doesn't set the entire ordinary of the mass. Although this does, but they're just really short movements. The first movement, Kyrie, Lord have mercy. The characteristic opening theme suggests a classical cross motif, but there's also a sequence of opposite and gradually decreasing melodic intervals that refer to a spiral movement towards a center or an absolute. The polyphony of the Kyrie becomes chordal at Christe, then individual voices at Kyrie again. The polyphonic voices in Kyrie convey omnipresence, and the chords at Christe mark the absolute that embodied itself as a specific entity. Obviously, that didn't come off the top of my head. That's from the booklet notes. Okay. I'm not that smart. Anyway, I wouldn't have picked all this out by myself. Anyway, the opening is sung by a single voice or multiple male voices on the same note as a chant, only the harmony isn't in a church mode, or at least not in a Roman church mode. It's pretty ear-grabbing. Harmony is gradually piled onto the line, with women's voices coming in only after the male voices, so the harmony actually does sound piled on, bottom to top. There are some pungent harmonies in this, otherworldly, but not offensive to the ear. The harmony is easily listenable, but very contemporary. At the 2 minutes and 50-second mark, vocal glissandos begin, sliding down via microtones. It sounds great in this context. The second movement, Gloria, opens with a variant of the opening motif of Kyrie, which now has a jubilant color, because Gloria is glory to God in the highest. It's praise of God. The melodic intervals become larger now as they go on, giving an impression of expansion, and at the word Deo, the voices become chordal again. We hear women's voices at the beginning singing a chant-like melody, but not in a Roman church mode, of course. Vocals slowly swirl in this setting, with male voices coming in to color in the bottom harmonies after the opening. The text is gotten through slowly, and the music and singing is compelling throughout. All of these mass sections have pretty odd endings, which leave one contemplating what you just heard afterwards. Third movement, Credo, I believe in one God. This is an abbreviated text, and the section represents the first phase of the evolving process. It's got a very ear-grabbing harmony at the beginning. Each section of the text gets a unique orchestration of verses and harmony. The recording, once again, is crystal clear, and all voices can be heard. That has a lot to do with Tüür's setting, of course. There's a lot of space and transparency between the voices, and there's a bit of untraditional melisma on certain vowels, more a spiraling sound than a melodic sort of flowering. This ends on an odd chord as well. Fourth section, which is track 5, Sanctus et Benedictus. The accumulated chords of the Credo crystallize here as if out of time. We hear solemn women's voices, and this setting, like many late 20th, early 21st century choral works, relies a lot on rich overtones produced by clashing harmonies for its otherworldly effect. You can hear that clearly in this section, and the text tends to stop and start in this setting, each line being sung and followed by a pause. The fifth movement, Agnus Dei, Lamb of God. The chords begin to dissolve again in single voices, eventually reaching equilibrium in the all-synthesizing final harmony at the words Dona nobis pacem, according to the booklet notes. This continues in much the same vein as the previous section, with pauses between each sung set of words. There's more traditional melisma in this section, though it's not foregrounded. Track 7, Omnia Mutantur, from the year 2020. This is multifaceted and rich, intertwining the famous sentiments of Ovid and Virgil about the transitory nature of everything. So this is not a religious work, though it is a meta, philosophical text. The work is rich in contrast, too. The harmony is a lot smoother and easier on the ear in this work, despite the fact that it was written only 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now. The work sounds pretty traditional. There's an interesting scattered hocketing of voices at around the 2 minute and 10-second mark on the words nulla salus bello, which means there is no safety in war. We should probably keep this in mind these days. This is nice because hocketing means one person on, say, the left will sing one word, and then the next word will be sung by someone on the right, and then the left and the right, so you can hear this ping-ponging between your two speakers. The various voices gradually come together into a forte statement of the line with the whole chorus in harmony. At 3 minutes and 35 seconds, the final line, Amor vincit omnia. Please print that out. Put it on your front door. It means love conquers all, is heard, and it's sung with rising lines that make one's spirits rise with them. I like the concept here. This is a choral work that choirs should check out, and it's beautifully performed here. Track 8, Canticum, Canticorum, Caritatis. This means a song of songs of charity, and this was written in 2020. It uses And I really loved this, by the way. It uses St. Paul's famous passage from his first letter to the Corinthians, in which he describes the nature of love. And if you've ever been to a wedding in the West, you've definitely heard this text, or at least part of it. The suggestive form of the work derives directly from the structure of the text. It's said in phrases, with all voices singing the syllables together in harmony. The rhythm is that of the spoken word, though there's a melody to the tones. This is the cleanest sense we get of Tüür's letting the words dictate the way the music will sound. The words are, of course, stirring, and they're not poetic. They're almost like spoken or written. They're prosaic, but they're really beautiful, as those of us who have read them know. And the music is stirring as well in parts. There are certain phrases that stand out for me, such as the entire "if I give away everything I own" verse. I especially like the tapering off and quietening of the ending of many verses, such as "non agit perperam non inflatur," which means "it is not pompous, it is not inflated," it referring to love, which is sung in a very non-pompous, non-inflated way. This is after the 4-minute and 30-second mark, if you want to sample that. Melisma is heard more as the work goes on. The words consistently evoke the feeling of the text. It's a great setting of these words, appropriately modest, not majestic. For me, this is the standout track on the album. It's a heartfelt setting of these eternally beautiful words. So I think I hold the words really close to my heart, so I really like the music as well. Sample that, track 8. The final track on the album, I'm not going to be able to say this, Rendaya Otulaul, which is a Wanderer's Evening Song in Estonian. This was written in 2001 and based on poems by Ernst Enno. In this case, this is a very different work from everything we've heard on this album. Tüür hadn't arrived at the style we heard in the Mass yet, which he calls a vectorial style. I don't really know what that means. But we can hear references in this work to Arvo Pärt's tintinnabuli style. Tintinnabuli means like bell-like, where the harmonies sort of pile on each other and they kind of sound like little bells. Especially at the beginning, where we hear a long-held bourdon, which is a drone, a low-pitched stop on an organ, and short replicas that sound in the background. So we hear like echoes of it in the background. The vocals are also used as quasi-instrumental accompaniment, a technique the composer rarely uses. Okay, so there are droning basses throughout the work, pinning down the melodic lines. This work, he mentioned to Arvo Pärt, but to me, this work reminded me more of John Tavener, the British composer, who is also Eastern Orthodox Christian and wrote a lot of works. It reminds me of Arvo Pärt as well, though. The rather long text is practically chanted throughout, with droning lines producing overtones accompanying. The drones stop in the 5th minute for the text, "a field of stars with silver glow," and the women's voices, divided into 2 lines, start singing the text in a methodical way, producing some fine overtone bloom at the end of phrases via the clashing harmony. I should mention, this is sung in Estonian, not English. So I'm going by the text here, the translation. The men's voices eventually come in with a rhythmic line singing like dum 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 dum, like kind of like a percussive melodic kind of sound. The men's voices take over for a bit of lower harmony in the 11th minute. The women return in the 12th minute as the lower male voices continue their dum 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 rhythmic pattern. This accompaniment speeds up and becomes more syllabically complex toward the end of the work. The work ends on an ethereal chord, the syllable dum heard heading down the scale. Like dum 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 dum. It kind of sounds like a plucked bass, I guess, imitation. The text for this work is very long, and the work itself goes on for 17 minutes of uninterrupted choral singing. It rather stands out as different on the album. The style isn't the same as the rest of the works, but it's a good listen and welcome all the same. Anyway, this is an album of beautiful choral singing, and don't let its contemporary nature scare you away. I think fans of choral music will all enjoy this. It's got a reverent tone for most of the album, and is genuinely moving at times, a quality I don't hear much in contemporary music, so it's very rare in a sense. This may be the gentlest album of music I've heard from Tüür so far. It's not a quality I associate with him. His symphonies often use rock rhythms and can get pretty wild, though he's been calming down in recent years. His effects are appealing, and the Collegium Musicali chamber choir sing brilliantly and with great clarity on this album. It's also beautifully recorded with great clarity. Recommended, and listen with the texts if you can. The words add to your enjoyment. I listened to this straight through, and I recommend it to those interested in choral music especially.
Yeah, this was very interesting. It's a meditative listen. The harmonies become really dense, but because the flow of the music is determined by the lyrical content, it's a very relaxed kind of atmosphere. And so you're not struggling to keep up on a horizontal movement that's just kind of flowing. And so I found that I could focus more on the vertical and hear all of these harmonies. Additionally, it was easier to grasp the harmonies in this vocal music compared to his instrumental works that we've listened to. I mean, you got all these different timbres stacked on each other. Sometimes it gets, a little bit hard to pick out.
He likes the orchestral glissando as well, where the whole orchestra goes, it sounds like that. It kind of sounds like a siren.
But here, with pure sounding, just human voice, I could really enjoy, that harmonic kind of structure going up and down, moving at this easy pace with the texts. And you get really pulled into it. And I felt maybe a little step closer to understanding his unique musical language, although there's still a lot to figure out. But definitely interesting and kind of engrossing, just for the wonderful sound of all these voices too.
Yeah. By the way, I mentioned what his orchestral music sounds like for that kind of like orchestral glissando or a lot of those. Listen to his violin concerto. Just pull up a recording of that and you'll see what I mean. And make sure the neighbors aren't home when you do that.
So we're going from these choral and some organ to a little different kind of organ for the jazz. We're going to be going again to one of our favorite instruments.
The Hammond organ. I feel better already.
Which, interestingly, was designed as a church organ as a less expensive replacement for a pipe organ, which is wind powered. And you have the Hammond, which uses this kind of electric and mechanical tone wheel. If you want to see something scary, go check out on YouTube. There's some videos of, of course I was curious and I always wanted to see what it's like inside one of them. Well, it's very mechanically and electronically complex system in there.
Indeed.
And of course, because they were initially designed, to be in churches, they weren't meant to be a portable instrument. I think those things weigh like 450 pounds. So they became really popular with jazz musicians and, kind of soul jazz. And later we used to hear organ all the time in 60s music and 70s music. And then unfortunately, I think, when pop music became synth focused in the 80s and like, wow, look at all these great new sounds we can make. And with these portable things, we sort of lost the organ for a while. But I think we're on a trend of the organ coming back because there's so much good organ music that's coming out in jazz and kind of more funky jazz, soul jazz kind of things as well. We've had a lot of organ episodes, so I thought, well, why not one more? Because there were some recordings.
One more? They're going to be loads more. I'm just sure of it.
And I think I've got a nice little program here for you tonight.
Now, I just want to say, before we started this podcast, I think I had 3 jazz organ recordings, and now I have like easily around between 20 and 30. So it's only in 2 years.
It'll do that to you, yeah. Well, the first recording, this almost slipped off from, the possibilities of entering. Because normally what I do is I keep a 3-month list. And then that previous month at the end of the current month will just get archived because I like to stay current. So this was at the danger of being archived. But I pulled it out and said, let's start with this one for a couple of reasons. One is the organist here is Mr. George Kontrafouris. And we've featured him a number of times on the podcast, both on organ and piano. And I wanted to check out the other players making up this organ trio. And the recording is called Our Groove, Your Move.
Great title.
Yeah, which plays off one of the tune titles we'll get to. It's on AMP Music and Records. And we've got together with George Kontrafouris, Jacob Roved and Sami Linna. And so I wanted to check these players out. Jacob Roved, I believe, is Danish, and he's a drummer and composer. He's educated at the Royal Conservatoire of the Netherlands and at the Sibelius Academy, Finland. And he's active on the Danish jazz scene and a lot of projects there. And Sami Linna, the guitarist here, he, in addition to playing guitar, works as a trustee on several music organizations and teaches guitar. And he also graduated from the jazz department of the Sibelius Academy. And he's also got a degree in music pedagogy from Stadia University of Applied Sciences. And he's getting his doctoral thesis completed too on combining tonality and modality in jazz performance. And so I'm not sure.
Oh, wow. That's some thesis.
Yeah, what the connection is with George Kontrafouris, but we come to kind of think of him as the godfather of Greek jazz.
Because of our Greek friends who pretty much told him that's who he was.
We've heard him in first episode 61. That was Mallet Maestros with the vibraphonist Dimitris Angelikis.
Right.
And then, of course, as part of Iakavos Simonitis' trio on Safe Place, and that was episode 64, Menage a Trio. And then we said, let's just go all out and do a whole Greek episode. Right. And we did episode 69, All Greek to Me, which is still getting a lot of downloads to these days. And we heard...
We got to do another one.
Yeah.
I've even got a title for it.
Okay. Well, we heard George Kontrafouris' own trio recording called Deep South, which was kind of interesting. And then come to find out also on there, we did the Spiral Trio, which ended up being one of our favorite recordings of last year. I still think it's one of the best piano trio recordings I've heard. And it turns out that George Kontrafouris was one of the teachers of Spyros Menesis, the pianist in Spiral Trio. And, Iakavos told us that, jazz kind of skipped a generation in Greece, kind of because of the political situation in the government. And luckily, there were people like George Kontrafouris who were teaching jazz and have taught a kind of new generation, and jazz seems to be booming again with a good scene in Athens there. And then we heard him once more in episode 87, Fall Frets with Apostolos Levantopoulos, After the Spirit. Also a really good recording with nice guitarist there too. So check those out. And well, here, I thought this was also appropriate to start out the program because they're focusing on some good old-time figures of 60s jazz, kind of soul, that hard bop sound that used the organ a lot. We're going to get some tunes from organists from that time, starting out with a Freddie Roach tune called Debug. It's D-E-B-U-G. And Freddie Roach was
2 words.
From the Bronx, and his first commercial recordings were with the great saxophonist Ike Quebec on Blue Note in 1961. I listened to these two all the time. Heavy Soul, which is a really great one, and also It Might As Well Be Spring. But this song is from the 1962 release Down to Earth, featuring Kenny Burrell on guitar. So that's big shoes to fill with guitar and organ. But yeah, they do a nice rendition of it here, taking it a bit slower than the original. It's in 6/8 with 4-measure intro of 2 alternating chords. And then it's a 12-bar blues. And Linna and Kontrafouris take the melody of rising riffs together. And the last 2 bars is just the chords we heard from the intro. And they go around twice, with Roved tracing out the 6/8 feel on the light cymbals. Linna solos first, and man, is he relaxed here with a great warm tone. He has some really fluid triplet lines, other cool rhythmic licks, also some fun bent double stop notes in there. He repeats and rips apart a riff in there to really build up tension. Kontrafouris follows, building up from short licks of pairs of notes in the middle and lower registers. He gets more speedy runs, but peppers in some bluesy repetition, keeping it all with a straight, smooth tone on the organ. They take it out with 2 more runs through the blues head and an outro similar to the intro with some final tasty licks from Linna. Track 2, another huge organ figure, Don Patterson. And, Mike Ladon told us a lot about him, too. If you haven't heard our interview with him, go back and check that out. It's called It's All Your Fault. This is Bowl Full of Yak. Y-O-K.
What is yak?
I don't know. No idea.
I thought maybe it might be a thing jazz people might know, but I guess not. I don't know.
So this one comes from the recording Satisfaction, 1966. Anyway, this one's also a little bit slower than the original. I guess they were chilled out on the recording day in the studio. This one's a minor and bluesy tune with a sparse melody handled by both organ and guitar over Kontrafouris' organ bass. It has some cool twists of chords, like in the 4th and 12th measure. The structure is an A-B-A with a 16-measure A section and an 8-measure B that turns major before it twists back to the minor. Kontrafouris takes over on the B section while Linna switches to chords. Another great relaxed bluesy solo from Linna here. I like how he uses a lot of repetition in his lines to build up tension. Some really speedy double time licks in this one as well. And Roved is subtle on the drums but adds tasty fills and snare textures underneath. Kontrafouris has some zippy lines in his solo on this one with punchy left-hand chords. Lots of interesting rhythmic figures in there as well. Once more through the melody with some final phrase repeats to end it. Track 3, not an organ player, but someone who had a lot of funky tunes himself, the great saxophonist Hank Mobley, This I Dig of You. And this is from 1960 Soul Station recording that had Art Blakey, Wynton Kelly, and Paul Chambers on it. This one has a speedy groove, a bit faster than the original on this one. There's an 8-measure intro with rising and then falling organ chords. Roved has a really cool, busy Latin clicky beat going, and Linna handles the melody on his own here. It's a 32-measure tune A-B-A-B form. The original has different feels on the sections, but they emphasize that here even more, keeping the A with a Latin feel and then breaking it to swing over walking organ bass for the B section. They keep it swinging for the solos, and Kontrafouris is first on this one over tight, bouncy chords from Linna. It's a playful one, working a descending 4-note idea into all kinds of lines. And then Linna shows off his agility with fluid, speedy lines, makes good use of repeated single notes. Roved has been keeping things grooving, and he gets his own solo on this one, focusing on some nice tom work before getting to those Latin-y cymbals to take another melody run with the others and a fun final chord with some final bluesy guitar licks. We're going to get one of Roved's original tunes for track 4, Unveil My Path. It's a very slow ballad, Roved keeping a super soft, brushed feel, and Linna takes the pretty melody, and Kontrafouris takes us to church on this one with some tremolo-y, soft chords. It's a 16-measure melody, and the chords are interesting, keeping you harmonically surprised right to the end. Kontrafouris solos first, switching to a very straight-sounding tone and keeping it smooth and subtle. They pick it up a bit for Linna's solo, giving it a double-time feel. And Linna finds nice melodic ideas in his solo here. They bring it back to the original feel for another run through the melody. Kontrafouris adding organ swells below this time, and it ends with a little tag of the first 3 melody measures that just sort of evaporates.
Yeah, I really like that the glow that the organ's able to get on this track. You know,
nice.
It's another cool sound that the Hammond can make.
Track 5, The Inchworm. This is a Frank Loesser tune originally performed by Danny Kaye in the 1952 film Hans Christian Andersen.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch that again. I haven't seen that since I was really a kid, really.
This one's a swinging waltz. There's an 8-measure intro, and then Kontrafouris takes on the fun interval jump melody. That's that inchworm kind of skipping over idea. It's a 16-measure melody, and they follow it up with 8 measures of rhythmic chords, and then they do both things again. Linna's up first for a solo, and he makes good use of the interval idea, getting his solo going. Some speedy triplet lines, and then really cool accented phrases. Kontrafouris starts out soft and low in his solo, building up out of some interval ideas from the melody too. Then a dizzying series of adventurous rising and falling lines that make some harmonic tension. He holds out a long high note and gets the, I don't know if he's using a Leslie or not, but that kind of tremolo effect spinning there a bit before they hit the rhythmic chords again and into the melody for a couple of rounds and final rhythmic jam to a fading finish.
I want to go back to like Danny Kaye for a minute because both you've seen this movie, right?
Yeah, maybe when I was a kid. Yeah,
because they were on TV. Now like young people, they don't watch TV anymore, so we just had to watch what was on TV back in the day. Right. And oddly, we wound up with this sort of latent knowledge of like movie history, just because of the
TV. Yeah,
people don't really have that anymore anyway.
And also musical knowledge, because a lot of the
musical knowledge too. Yeah,
tunes. Yeah,
early jazz. I remember the Abbott and Costello movies had like people like Ella Fitzgerald in them. Yeah, she sang a tisket, a tasket.
Variety, right? And we had variety then.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to end up then with the track that the album title is taken from, but this is My Groove, Your Move, another Hank Mobley tune. And this one comes from Roll Call 1960 with Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, Wynton Kelly piano, Paul Chambers bass, and Art Blakey on drums. And they give this a pretty similar groove and tempo to the original. It's a 12-bar minor blues with fun chords that goes around twice and then finishes with an 8-bar kind of bridge section into a solo break. A nice stop time and then change up of feel from the 8th measure. Kontrafouris takes the melody here and continues on into a solo. Roved has that Blakey backbeat feel going nicely. Really good organ solo of snaking lines, little trills, and a big bluesy finish. Linna starts out with a lot of happy-sounding melody ideas in his solo. Little ornaments are nice as well, before turning bluesier with some snappy licks and repeated riffs, and really biting articulation for a great finish. And Kontrafouris takes it through the melody with a nice rip into a big final chord to wrap the recording up. And that's it. It's short at just 36 minutes, but a nice way to get this jazz organ set of recordings started with these classic hard bop tunes, recalling the golden days of jazz organ. A fun romp on the Inchworm standard, and a nice original ballad from Roved. Linna's a very tasty guitarist with a warm tone, fluid lines, bluesy bite in the right spots. I'm going to keep a lookout for more of his recordings. Kontrafouris always sounds great on organ or piano, and his solos here put on a nice display of variety from subtle lines to exciting runs, and nice bass work too, underneath keeping things groovy. And good drumming from Roved, steady, tasty fills, and a variety of feels.
Yeah, I actually, not only is it 36 minutes is an acceptable length for an album. It's no problem. But yeah, 6 tracks, I would have liked, a few more because this was a really good record. I liked it a lot too. It had a lot of comfortable grooves. And of course, I liked the playing a lot. The guitar is clean, upfront sound, and it had a beautiful ringing tone. And Kontrafouris gets a lot of really interesting tones out of the organ. He's very blues oriented. The first 2 tracks had that bluesy kind of feel to them. And I like the way he'll start his solos like minimally and then build them into something big. He really likes that.
Yeah, he starts small and builds up.
He likes to start small and build up, exactly. I feel like I'm watching a painter improvise an epic idea from a blank canvas when I hear him play. Like he's just kind of doing some black dot at first, and then it's just suddenly it's becoming this epic thing. He's really good at that. Yeah, he, especially on the tune The Inchworm, we're back to that Danny Kaye track again, would be a really good example of that. And the simple, he starts with a simple, playful melody, and it becomes something grand in his solo. His playing brought me back to that. Last week we talked about that Schumann piece, and then the Beethoven second movement, where the exposure to like one theme kind of makes the other theme grow, and you kind of have the feeling like this is exposed to his mind, and it just kind of grows like a tree.
Right.
Yeah. It's a short album. The playing is great, and you'll wish there were more. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I just kept playing it. Just put it on repeat.
But fortunately, we've got 2 more recordings for you. And the next one, well, this was the surprise pick that turned out to be pretty interesting in a different way.
Yeah, I like this one too. Wow. Yeah, this was a big surprise.
And this is called Move Your Feet. It's on Jazz Family label, and it's by the French guitarist Michael Valeanu. He was born in Paris, 1985. He's now based in New York. And in the little bio that I found of him, it says his passion for jazz and for all the other genres of music that he has come across while growing up as a musician in France and in the United States has allowed him to create a unique voice on his instrument. So that all the other genres stuck in my mind, and I'll get to that as we go through here. So he's on the electric guitar. The Hammond organist is Fred Nardin, who is French also, and we actually heard him once before back on episode 21, Organ Power.
Wow.
With the saxophonist Gaia Horelu. And rounding out the trio here is Andreas Svensson on drums, and he's based in Copenhagen, but he's got a BA in music performance from the Rhythmic Music Conservatory in Copenhagen, and also a master's degree in music performance from Manhattan School of Music in New York City. So I guess they all crossed paths in New York, although this recording was recorded at La Claque Studio in Paris. And we got mostly originals here by Valeanu, and starting out with a tune called At the Red Room. It gets a rubato start with guitar improvising over organ chords and drum fills. Svensson gets it going with a couple of measures of drums setting a 6/8 feel. Then Valeanu takes the happy-sounding melody over the clicky swinging beat. There's an ABA pattern with 8 measures each, and then things change up with a slow 4-beat stop time section suddenly for Valeanu to start soloing. The beat returns with a slow swinging groove over walking organ bass for Valeanu to continue on. It's got a really centered and clean tone on guitar with snappy and bluesy licks. Don't get too comfortable in that groove, though, because they shift it back to the fast 6/8 as Valeanu goes along with speedy licks and some fun interval play. Nice fills from Svensson on the drums there, too. And back to the stop time start for a solo from Nardin. I like his lazy, carefree phrasing starting out here. They work it back to the speedy 6/8 again, and he gets really swinging with lines and some cool high held out chords, and they go on from the stop time back through another round of the melody, a section with some end phrase repeats and more licks from Valeanu. A fun start with lots of rhythmic change-ups on the way. Track 2, a really unique tune, and you mentioned liking this one.
Yeah, I have something, in fact, to say about this one, but go ahead. I'll kind of come in when you mention it.
This is another Valeanu original, Virginia, and it's really unique, as I said. First of all, what you'll notice is the timbre, starting out with clean guitar over just organ low notes, no drums, and so it's a really soft blend. Interesting moving guitar chords.
And that's the part I wanted to solo out. They were like extraordinarily like beautiful to me.
Yeah.
Like they're striking,
nice.
And it really made me sit up in my seat when I heard them. This is right after the opening guitar.
Yeah.
Like it goes into another section. You'll notice it when you hear it.
Yeah, it's very unique. Along with those chords, there's little rhythmic licks on the guitar and some nice double-stopped lines. Sometimes they move in sync with the interesting changing chords, the organ and guitar. And Svensson sneaks in with a soft cymbal roll at around 1 minute, and then he's on to soft brushwork. Things get more of a pulse with subdivided organ figures under the guitar. And Valeanu and Nardin trade improvised, interestingly, 7-measure phrases as the tune goes along. Check out the little muted rhythmic figures Valeanu does under the organ. Very tasty as well. Svensson switches to sticks as things pick up intensity in the solo exchanges, adding some tom fills, and back to just organ and guitar for those interesting chord lines and melody figures from the beginning into the undulating organ section to a soft ending. We're going to get a non-original, The Limehouse Blues. This is by Douglas Ferber and Philip Brown. It's a really old, popular British tune. I guess the Limehouse district in pre-war days was the Chinatown of London. And so this tune is from 1921. You can hear other versions of it, Django Reinhardt, Joe Pass, but I've never heard one quite like this. It starts out with some busy drum work and deep tom sounds from Svensson. Then what they do at the beginning, playing around with the first section of the tune is very interesting. The organ and guitar work alternating 3-note riffs together. The meter is kind of unique. The riffs are kind of straight feeling for 2 measures of 4 beats, but the spaces that alternate between them are 3 beats and then 2 beats. So it's really kind of unsettling. Valeanu splits off with a different line before the next fast swinging section of the tune, which really contrasts comes in. And then he comes out of the break from there for a solo. They give the first section a Latin feel with nice cymbal work from Svensson, and then they switch it back to swing. A nice fast boppy lines from Valeanu. Same feel switch-ups under Nardin's organ solo, who also gets a swift and bouncy one on this one. And once more through the melody with the fun rhythmic change-ups in structure to finish it up. Back to Valeanu original for track 4, One Another. So softly flowing tune that gets going with 16 measures of intro of a cycle of 4 chords in the organ and a little guitar rhythmic figures laid on top of that. Valeanu gets the melody, which gets some interesting syncopation in the 9th measure, and Nardin takes over from the 14th measure with the chord figures into a solo that has a lot of rhythmic variety. The beat is straight and soft, Svensson mixing it up with fills, and Valeanu returns for a guitar solo that starts with snappy rhythmic figures and turns more flowing and then into a lot of speedy lines. They return to the opening chord pattern, this time with Valeanu joining in, and they finish with that interesting 13-measure melody. And the title track for number 5, also a Valeanu original, Move Your Feet. It's a samba here, and they get going with a 16-measure intro, enjoying the alternating chord groove and throbbing organ bass with some little organ fills as well. Valeanu takes the choppy melody made of double stops and chords. The form is kind of interesting too. It's like a A, B, C, A in 8-measure segments. Either that or just the B section is 16 measures. It's more flowing on the B and C parts there. Valeanu's solos first, and his lines really snap with the groove, ending up in some bluesy double stop lines. Nardine's got a playful solo on this one, and then they surprise with a new fun start and stop unison melody line for guitar and organ over the A sections on a final run through. Good Latin beats all the way through from Svensson. Track 6, King Cobra, a Herbie Hancock tune. They keep a Latin beat idea for this tune that has different sections, first with guitar chords over pulsing syncopated organ, then organ and guitar moving together with rising guitar, and then a line of rising intervals from descending notes. Valeanu solos first, and the feel changes up to a driving swing on the way. Svensson really adds hits on his accented syncopated phrases of the solo with nice interplay between the two. Nardine has some fun with rhythmic chords in his solo on this one, and some adventurous lines. Once more through the melody sections, and Nardine gets a little kind of swirl on his organ tone this time going, and the ending slows just a bit. Track 7, Vida Rica. It's also a Valeanu composition. This has a pentatonic folk song quality to the melody, starting with the guitar over soft organ. The form is interesting, with a repeating A section, then a B section that has an unexpected modulation and continues on for 15 measures before another maybe new version of the A section twice over organ swells and drum fills. It comes down soft for Valeanu's solo. Really nice articulation and pearly notes on the guitar on this one. Nardine has flowing chords in his solo here, getting some different tones and swells, and they finish it up with just the A sections of the melody to some final ringing guitar chords. It's got a real kind of out west kind of tone to it. Track 8, Tea Time, and it's time for the weekly 7/8 tune. We heard 2 last week. Everybody's using this time signature these days, and this is a super funky one here. Check out the groove. It's really infectious. There's an 8-measure intro to get you settled into it. The construction is a 12-bar blues kind of thing, crazy syncopation in the 4th measure, and I think there's an extra beat in the 10th measure. There's one more beat before you get to the end. They go around that twice. Nardine solos first with nicely syncopated phrases over this odd meter, building up some harmonic tension with outside notes towards the end. Valeanu's funky and fluid, also taking some harmonic diversions on his solo. He plays some cool bent and choked notes in there too, and jams out on some chords. This is my favorite solo so far on the recording. They keep a soft vamp for Svensson to do some tasty beats over, with Valeanu working up some ringing chords. And they take another run through the melody, but they get caught up on repeats of the 9th and 10th measures, and it finishes unresolved. And the final track, 9, Endless Fields, also a Valeanu original. It's another folk-sounding melody at a slow waltz tempo. There's an 8-measure intro of alternating chords before the gentle guitar melody. Before we hear the repeat of the first section, there's a 4-measure interlude of more ominous strumming on the guitar. The next section has a modulated lift to it, then it comes back down and transforms some more with swelling organ. Valeanu comes out of that with the bluesy solo licks, actually getting some Hendrix-like riffs in there. They bring it back soft for some unison guitar and organ chords, and take it out with the alternating chords from the beginning. So I found this a very enjoyable recording with a lot of depth and things to discover. The compositions are really varied in style, structure, and rhythmic feels. Valeanu's original tunes often take unexpected turns with unorthodox structures. The 2 folky tunes and Virginia are a nice contrast to the super funky Tea Time. Valeanu's guitar playing has a real pleasing tone and can be fluid or articulate with a bite when he wants. Nardine's organ playing has a wide palette of sounds from soft to swelling, and his solos are creative and good drumming and accented support from Svensson all the way through as well. Definitely check this recording out and keep your ear on Michael Valeanu. He's a really skillful guitarist, tasty, and there's hints of those other musical influences that I mentioned at the beginning in that folk and that little sort of, I felt, Hendrixy sort of burning up there for a bit.
Yeah, for me, Valeanu was the standout player on this album. Everybody was great, but I mean, just that chord pattern that he does on Virginia. And I kind of didn't mention this when you were talking about the track, but the theme on Villa Rica has a great kind of, it has this folk song feel over a jazzy rhythm, and I found it really catchy.
Yeah.
And the organ's underpinning of that theme was really gorgeous too. His solos and chords are just attractive throughout. He was always grabbing my ear. I liked his ear for chord voicings as well. He's a little different than what you normally hear. And especially in tea time, I liked his chords in tea time. I think this is an album to sit down and listen to and really enjoy. And I think this is a guitarist that I really want to keep my ear on.
Yeah, very exciting player.
This was a real surprise for me. I was a really... that's one of my favorite things to happen in music, when you just don't really expect much and then something... kind of magical happens. Like, wow,
That's what I want to really do, with the jazz picks in this podcast. I find something and say, I haven't heard of this guy. Let's check it out. And then
I'm just glad it's still happening to me in my 50s. For most people, it ends after college.
Yeah, right.
They already know what they like, and that's it for the next 80 years.
All right, we're going to finish things up with a really great recording here. I was looking forward to getting this out. This came out May 5th, and it's on one of our favorite labels, PosiTone, and the organist Jim Alfredson and his new recording, Family Business. So Alfredson's a Michigan-based organist. He plays in a lot of genres, specializing in Hammond B3 and other vintage keyboards, and all kinds of stuff from soul jazz to blues to progressive rock. And he's played with such names as Buddy Guy, B.B. King, Taj Mahal, David Sanborn, and Randy Brecker, to name a few. And his albums are also wide-ranging, from solo synth to soul jazz. In fact, we heard him once before with Michael Deese on Give It All You Got. That was way back in episode 7, Soaring Sopranos and Omnipotent Organs. So Alfredson's here on organ and also clavinet on tracks 1 and 4. We'll get to that as we go on. He's got Will Bernard on guitar, who's a guitarist from Berkeley, California, but now in New York. The great Michael Deese on trombone, Diego Rivera, tenor sax, Alex Sipiagin, trumpet and flugelhorn. We've heard all these guys lots of times on the podcast, that great cast of PosiTone.
I feel like I know them at this point,
Yeah. E.J. Strickland on drums, who is the identical twin brother of saxophonist Marcus Strickland. We've got some extra percussion on tracks 3, 4, 7, and 9 by Kevin Bujo Jones. And I want to give a little bit of credit also here for the horn arrangements done by Chris Glassman, because they really add a lot, getting the lines really done nicely for all the horns. And as always, the great producer of PosiTone, Mark Free, who comes up with a lot of concepts for these albums and puts everything together. The engineer here, Nick O'Toole. And we're going to start out with a Lonnie Smith, Dr. Lonnie Smith tune, Peepin'. This is from 1967, Lou Donaldson's recording Shingling, that had Blue Mitchell on trumpet on there, if I remember right.
I think my dad had that album.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those in the mystical record collection.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, just soak up this great super tight groove here and enjoy the great sound quality. This recording is good all around, but the organ just sounds fantastic. Basically, this tune is a 12-bar blues. The trio goes around it once, and next time, Rivera joins in, and Bernard works the licks with him. Check out that tight guitar. Oh, it's really, this groove is great. Rivera's solo is first on this tune. The combination of the syncopated organ bass, punchy chords, Bernard's guitar interjections are just so funky. Bernard's solos on guitar next. Bluesy, nice lower register licks, double stops, all very tasty. And then Alfredson cleans up, and he has great punchy repeated notes in his solo, little trills, falls into bluesy phrases. Everyone's back for another round of the melody with some final phrase repeats. Then what gets added in as they groove out. But clavinet. That's like chocolate chips on chocolate ice cream levels of funkiness, you know. Rivera blows some more over the groove at the end that they keep going. And I think my sideburns grew a bit while I was listening to this. You know?
Right. Was that the album that Stevie Wonder did Superstition on, or was that a different one? What was it? The keyboard instrument? I don't know.
Oh, you mean the clavinet?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that sound.
It's that sound. Yeah. Yeah. Stevie Wonder had sideburns then too.
Yeah. I think everyone did in the 70s. Yeah. All right, track 2 is a contribution from Michael Deese. It's called 4 Miles. It's got a flowing 16-bar organ intro, and then we get the horn melody. All 3 horn players here in unison. It really swings, recalling Miles Davis's 4, if you know that melody. And it's similarly 32 measures, mostly with the same 2 halves, but a different ending into a solo break on the second half of it there. And Deese is up first. He breezes along with effortless swing and nice little hesitations. Sipiagin follows with a lyrical and melodic solo. Nice playful final line in it. And Rivera's fluid and swinging with some fast triplet lines thrown in. They return to the intro idea for Alfredson to start out, building up some tension over Strickland's fills before launching into the melody chords with a swinging solo. Bernard gets a bouncy guitar solo before Strickland gets around on the drums, and once more through the melody to wrap it up. Track 3 is called Foster Blues. This is also an Alfredson original. I'm assuming it's for Ronnie Foster. Great shuffle feel on this tune. The organ trio takes it around once. It's not a 12-bar blues, but rather an 18-bar form with little harmonic twists in the 9th and 13th measures to make you smile. They repeat that, and the horns are in with little harmonized hits and answering phrases to the organ melody. A nice little trumpet solo line in the final section of that part there. They're very good arranging by Chris Glassman. Alfredson is out for a solo first. This is a great gospel-y tone here. Super speedy lines and bluesy licks, an out-of-sight solo. Deese is next, smooth with nice melodic ideas over the chord changes, and Sipiagin keeps that fluid kind of movement going as well. A little sassy half valve in there, clean high notes before some double time licks. Bernard's after that on guitar, some great bluesy licks. I love the little choke notes he gets in there as well. And Rivera gets a relaxed and flowing solo on this tune as well. Twice around the melody, just like the opening to a funky vamped groove with horn hits to stretch it out. And you won't want this tune to end. The groove is just so good.
Yeah, this album was sort of like that. I mean, you gave this to me early too, so I was really grooving to it before we even chose it for the podcast. Yeah.
Another Alfredson original, the Side Eye for track 4, and actually comes to be that it was okay that the previous groove ended because this one is a killer groove as well. And Strickland gets it going. Grooves, yeah. On the drums with a funky 8-measure intro. Organ bass picks up into some super tight, funky rhythmic guitar and organ interplay. Another nice horn arrangement on this tune with hits between the organ lines, longer swelling notes as well, individual horn trades and pauses too. It keeps it changing up as it moves along. Awesome syncopated organ bass lines. Rivera gets a solo over great ghosty organ chords, and then Alfredson solos on his own next with huge swells, staccato percussive hits, and the clavinet gets thrown in there as well. Oh, man. Deese is up next with some tricky slide work and growls, and Bernard follows full of funkiness and tricky triplets in his lines. Sipiagin lets the high notes fly in his solo here. They bring it back down for another run through the sections with the horns. Track 5 is called Verna, and it's an Alfredson original. And so before we just OD on funkiness, we get a little break with this flowing waltz tune here.
It's got a breezy feel to it, so it's still kind of positive, you know?
Yeah, it's got an intro with horns joining in on lines halfway through. The first melody section is taken by Alfredson for 20 measures. It repeats with the horns joining in on an arrangement to a different and longer ending into new sections that build up. Strickland gets the excitement up with nice cymbal work, and then it comes down for a tasty guitar solo from Bernard. Great organ swells underneath. and it gets into a more driving waltz groove towards the end. The beat simmers down for Alfredson's solo start with soft high register melody lines. He soon gets that kind of spinning Leslie sound for some gospel sounds a bit before tying things back to the melody and a return of the horns. And Alfredson gets more inspired and continues on, ringing out some really intense tones that then calm down and take us to church with just a solo rubato organ for an ending of lovely held chords.
I want to say the guitar solo in this, the words I used to describe it are airborne and freedom loving.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's just made me feel, like life was great. And I liked it a lot.
This whole album is just full of wonderful energy.
We should just drop that track into communist countries so that they just know what life can be like,
Track 6, Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod, another Alfredson original. A cool speedy modal tune with fun interplay between the horns and organ riffs. There's some fun topsy-turvy trumpet lines from the 33rd measure and individual lines for the bone and sax as well. Alfredson solos first with fiery speedy lines, Rivera's next, then Cypriagan, who really rips up through the harmonic changes on this one. And Bernard follows on guitar with some tricky rhythmic ideas. Deesa's next, sounding buttery with fast slide work through that topsy-turvy section, even at this fast tempo. They all trade some eights with Strickland on the drums and take another run through the melody sections and a little bit of fun with the horns on the end to finish it up. Track 7, another Alfredson original, REO Town. And for our non-US-based listeners, REO Town is a district in Lansing, Michigan. It's considered the birthplace of the automobile in the US. And so it's named after REO, Ransom Eli Olds. So he was an automobile pioneer, and his name is where we get Oldsmobile and also the REO brand, and I guess that led to the REO Speedway.
That's what I'm thinking. The REO Speedwagon name probably comes from that.
Yeah, that's where it comes from, right?
Okay, yeah.
So a little bit of U.S. Industrial history centered around Michigan.
How about that?
Anyway, time to chill out with a relaxed Latin-y groove. The trio starts it out with an 8-measure intro, and Jones's extra percussion stands out on this one. There's a smooth, harmonized horn-arranged melody, seems to be A-B-A-B, with the sax and trombone on the A sections, and Cypriagan taking the B section. In the second B section, the sax and bone have some supporting lines to fill it out. Rivera solos first, sounding smooth and smoky, but also snappy with rhythmic phrases. Alfredson has bluesy lines mixed into more explorative ideas and chords in this solo, and it sounds like Cypriagan's on flugelhorn here. He gets all fluffy and flowing with some really tasty licks. There's another breeze through the melody sections, and then a little groove continuation for Alfredson to play on a bit to a slowed ending. Track 8, Strange Matter, and this is Alfredson's tune as well. Well, that would be a matter of time. You can say 6/4, but that's just to start. They get you used to it with a great bass groove on the organ for 4 bars, and then the horns join in for hits with the guitar for 4 more. Alfredson takes the melody, and the first 8-measure section stays in 6/4. Then the horns have some hits in a 4-measure section of 5/4, the last note of which is actually the first beat of a new 12-measure section of flowing horn lines that goes to 4/4. Then 4 measures of 5/4, and the last beat again is the start of 2 measures of 4/4 to finish it up. Strange indeed. Alfredson gets back to the 6/4 with a few measures of groove before starting his solo. It's funky with some dazzling speedy lines thrown in, sticking on the 6/4 for an extended time, but then working through the other sections as well. They go through the melody again, but stick on the final 5/4 section for Strickland to mix things up on the drums underneath. Then the horns drop out, but return to end it up with a final hold. And the last track, another Alfredson original, Easy Breezy. And this one's got a breezy feel for sure, but it's in 7/4, or at least alternating 4 and 3 beat measures, but it sort of has a constant 7 beat to it. They get it going with a hypnotic intro groove of guitar riffs over organ bass for 8 measures, with some added ghostly organ tones on the second half of the intro. Jones's percussion adds to the groove nicely. It seems to be a 32-measure AABA form, with the guitar taking the first section. Spiagin takes the next A section with harmonized horns under him. The B section contrasts with more moving horn and guitar parts, and then a final horn-arranged section. Spiagin solos first, sounds like flugelhorn again here, melodic, smooth, and silky, even when reaching up high at the end. Rivera follows, keeping it with a flowing kind of feel. Tasty guitar work under him from Bernard, and Dees rises dreamily on his solo with a great tone, getting that longing feeling that only trombone can get, but he also mixes in some speedy slide work and interval ideas. And Alfredson follows that with a relaxed melodic solo. The horns are back for the final B and A sections. They give it a pretty ending with an exchange back and forth of the first melody line we heard in the beginning of the tune between guitar and organ, and then each of the horns gets a turn, ending with Spiagin's line to a final hold. So I thought this is a fabulous recording. It's definitely going to be in my physical collection. Great original tunes.
Yeah, mine too.
From Alfredson, one from Dees, plus Lonnie Smith. There's some tricky time signatures, but everything grooves. Sometimes it's almost frightening how great the grooves are out here. There's plenty of bluesiness and some other Latin feels too. The horn arrangements are creative and make the tunes special. All these guys are big name players and put on their usual show of fine horn solos. Bernard was new to me, and I enjoyed his feel and great solos on guitar too. Strickland's tight and creative on drums, but most of all, Alfredson blows you away with his Hammond playing. His technique and solo ideas are awesome, but he has that special feel for the Hammond and knows how to get the best sounds and effects for every musical situation. I'd put him at the top level of players that we've heard on any of the recordings in the podcast. Incredible sound on the recording for the organ and all around as well. Great job by Mark Free and Nick O'Toole.
Yeah, and this is a very old school sound on this album as well, just with all these old grooves. Now, the thing about the grooves I want to say is that these grooves are just so much better than what you hear today in popular music. Yeah. But they're not hard grooves the way that you heard in early 70s, like music from like the Ohio Players or bands like that. But it falls somewhere in between, and it's more jazz than anything, like R&B like that. But we're forgetting how to do this, and I think we need to remember, and people should really hear this album so that they can just get their groove back on. There were great solos on this record, too. And one of the things I liked about this album that you didn't mention, because you pretty much mentioned everything else I said here, is that it's a large ensemble, and they all get to solo on certain tracks, like in Foster Blues and Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod. You're just wondering when the whole solo section is going to end, because there's just a new instrument coming in all the time. It's like it's almost like this big. It kind of sets this atmosphere of just you're at this big party and you really don't know what's happening. I really enjoyed that a lot. Yeah, I also liked the organ solo in Strange Matter. Yeah, which kind of stood out for me. Although he was great really throughout, with these kind of like almost percussive things he did on the organ too to kind of accentuate the groove. I like the way a lot of the tracks settle into a kind of vamp at the end. Like it doesn't just end with a theme. Yeah. Like there's sort of a coda at the end. And
I like that too.
Yeah, it was a nice. It was just kind of a unique and fresh album, even though it has like a very old school sound as well. So it's traditional, but it's kind of not, but it really is. It's really something. I highly recommend it. This was my album of the week of all the 6 that we've heard. The sound in the lower end was really good too. Yeah, I want this on CD. Absolutely. Yeah,
it does. You're right. It does the low end of the organ, the bass pedals and the swells, the percussive things the Hammond can do. They all really jump right out of the speakers and hit you there. So
yeah, I was liking this from the first notes that I heard in track 1. Yeah, it just kept going from there. It's not. I should mention it's not a party album. It's a groove album, but it's not. It's not really a. Doesn't have that party feel to it. It's something to listen to. Yeah,
this one was the one that got me inspired to do another organ episode. Right. So thanks for that. PosiTone. We like almost everything. Almost every month there's a great PosiTone release that I really got to hear. So so that's it for this episode. Next week we're going to do something a little different. I think we're going into the chambers again, aren't we?
Yeah, we've actually got a theme, which is weird because we've got you have a solo one,
right?
See, I don't. I have like violin and harpsichord or fortepiano. Then I have a piano trio, and then I have a quartet, and you have that. So we can just do some musical counting and say solo, duo, trio, quartet, and that's what we're going to do. We have an odd theme.
Got a really nice piano and bass duo that you're going to want to check out. And yeah, it should
We've
be
got one of our favorite composers, CPE Bach. That's Carl Philipp Emanuel, the oldest surviving Bach son. We're big fans of his music on this podcast. I'll explain more why next week.
Yeah,
I think I'm going to mention this next week too. But I think Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. You know, he had patron saints. I think Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach should be the patron musician of the postmodern age that we live in, because he's got a lot of the qualities that a lot of postmodern people have. But in a good way in his case, you know, sort of, but he kind of plays into that. Yeah.
So if you want to know what those recordings are, not too long after this episode gets published, I'll put up the playlist for next week on Deezer, and there'll be a link to it also on the Facebook page. As always, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Remember those other music-related podcasts. As we sign off here, the little promos for each one will be at the end of the episode, so stick around and listen to those. Any final words, Mike?
No, just looking forward to next week. It was kind of a disappointing classical week this week, I thought. I did like the Erkis-Ventura recording, though. Yeah. And the Frescobaldi I liked, too. I shouldn't really complain, but I don't know. It was good, but it wasn't exciting. I need something exciting. Maybe next week. We'll see.
Right, we'll see. There's always 6 more recordings coming your way in episode 117. So keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Gerald Albright, Rhea Schneider, Charlie Hunter, Luke Robillard, Sean Jones, Walter Beasley, Steve Swallow. Something Came from Baltimore is a jazz, blues, and R&B podcast and radio show, and it's not really about Baltimore. Subscribe to the podcast and listen to your favorite artist or future favorite artist. That's Something Came from Baltimore, and be a part of that Be More music scene. Joe Lovano, Jeff Compton, Paula Cole, Danuzo Makatani, Ann Passio, Ches Smith, Thumbscrew, mostly.
Hi, jazz fans. This is the founder and host of Neon Jazz, Joe Domino. It's both a weekly radio show and interviews with musicians from all over the world, like the Netherlands, New York City, and back to Kansas City, the home of Neon Jazz, covering the rich history and modern world of jazz in a fresh way, featuring interviews with the likes of Arturo Sandoval, Sonny Rollins, Maria Schneider, and countless others. Find our weekly show on Mixcloud. Subscribe to the interviews via iTunes and YouTube. We are Neon Jazz.
Same difference. 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.